And today, we're going to continue this series. We're going to look at this idea, and this hot take is one that is the main point there on your notes. It is the hot take of the night. Freedom is on the other side of surrender. Freedom is on the other side of surrender. Now, this has been this has not been an easy message for me to put down on paper. I'm looking at an iPad. Not an easy message for me to type out on a screen. This has not been an easy one for me because I don't want to believe it sometimes, if I'm just honest. Fully transparent here tonight, holding nothing back. Sometimes I don't believe this. Sometimes I like control. Most times I like control. Maybe you're like me. Maybe this is going to be a message that kicks you in the teeth too, because it's what it's done for me. And so perhaps maybe this message is just for me tonight, but I don't believe that. I believe that this hot take, that there's freedom on the other side of surrender, is one that you need to hear too. Because truthfully, our culture says the complete opposite of it. I mean, we all know this. Our culture says to never give up, right? Keep fighting, keep punching, never let your hands down, always have one more punch to give, never back down. That is what we are told. That's what we are taught from a young age, right? Keep your hands up. Just keep going. Keep fighting. Keep grinding. Never give up. But if you're anything like me, at times, that's not who we are. We do need to understand this hot take, that there is freedom on the other side of surrender. If you're anything like me, when you hear that word, though, surrender, your heart shudders a little bit. You get taken aback. You're a little scared because you and I are both aware that there are things that we should surrender. There are things that we should open our hands to and stop white knuckle gripping. That we have some things we should let go of and leave and surrender to God. But surrender is not easy. It's not. I would argue sometimes it's not even natural in our sin nature. Surrender is not a new word. It's not a new concept. This is something that's been around for a while. Surrender has actually been around since Genesis, since the literal beginning of the cosmos, of all that we have before us. There was two people in the very beginning that God created, Adam and Eve. You all probably know this story very well. Adam and Eve were there with God. They were made in the image of God, the scripture says. And so by that very identifier, they were made for his glory. Just their very existence spoke to who God is. So they glorified him in just their being and living and moving and breathing. And by virtue of that perfection alone, there in the very garden, they continued to live with him. So walk with him and talk with him and commune with him. They were literally living in a state of surrender without even knowing it, just because they were with him. They were literally just there, enjoying life with him. They lived for him and through him and by him. This is what they did. That was until the serpent slid in. Genesis 3, right? The introduction of sin itself. This shrewd, sly serpent slides onto the scene. And we understand this to be the manifestation, the presence of the evil one. The devil, Satan himself, God's arch nemesis, right? This is who this is. But the devil didn't come in and say, hey, don't surrender. That wasn't what he did at all. The devil actually didn't even say that. He simply put them in a position to surrender to something or someone other than God. That's all that he did. Where their bodies and their lives would literally be given over, submitting to something other than the one that they should submit to. That they would lean in and bow down to a created thing and a created concept rather than the Creator himself. And so through this temptation, through this deception, Adam and Eve would willingly sacrifice their very lives, their very existence, for the idea that they could just have it all without God. That God was holding out on them, that there was something else to be attained and grasped. This is the lie. This is the thing that they believed. They stopped believing that God was the worthy one, and instead they were worthy. They had something else that they could attain, that they could be like God, right? This is the same reasoning you and I use to this day while we live and exist and move and breathe. I do, you do, we all do. That's why the word surrender causes our hearts to skip a beat. That's why we don't like to surrender. It's why it's not natural to us. It scares us because we think that if we give to God what he's telling us to give him, that we're going to lack something. We think that if we hand over that thing that just means too much to us, we think that if we stop bowing down at the foot of the idols that you and I create out of our own being, that when we open our hand and surrender something to him, or surrender our very lives to him, that he's not going to give something back to us in return. That we are literally going to be without, and our hands are going to be empty, and we're going to be left wanting. That's what we believe. We believe that surrender to God is somehow the practice of actually relinquishing peace and hope, especially joy. How many times have you heard someone argue, and maybe even yourself, I've done it at times, argue and kind of, hesitate to fully dive in, to fully submit to God, to surrender to him, simply because they think that if they do so, the Christian life is boring. What fun could be had? There's no way it's going to be that joyous. Hear me. If you're sitting there right now, no shame on you, but that's an ancient lie, brother and sister. Like, it's not truth. The truth is that there's actually freedom on the other side of surrender. So much more to be experienced than that which you think you're going to lose. Because what that lie says is that once my hands are open and my hands are empty, that God is not big enough and God is not good enough to fill them up again. That's what that lie says. And you and I believe it. I still, at times, believe it. And it's one that we have to surrender. Because it's not even fear of surrendering at that point. It's just unbelief that God is better than everything that he's wanting us to give to him. That's what we're believing. And there's hope, there's life when we fully surrender. There's actually freedom. There's a story in the Old Testament, one that you perhaps have heard even recently if you attend Metro or watch online. Pastor Seth actually shared about this story from 1 Samuel chapter 1 of this woman named Hannah. And so I'm going to give you a little bit of the Cliff Notes version of the story, but I really encourage you to go and read it, because as I have just been wrestling hard with this idea that there's freedom on the other side of surrender, Kody, just trust and believe that God has something good for you. And on the other side of all of this, as I'm fighting and I come to this text and I hear Seth talk about it and God is leading me to this for this message, I'm like, are you kidding me, God? And I'm getting upset because I feel this text in a different way than I felt before, just because of where I'm at right now in life. Hannah is a woman who is married to this guy named Elkanah, or however you want to pronounce it. His name's Elkanah. She's married to him, but he's not just married to her. He's also married to another chick named Peninnah. Now, that's red flags right there. I'm just telling you, like, you don't follow in his footsteps, right? It's just not going to end well. And so this is the situation he's living in, right? He has two wives. One's name's Hannah, one's name's Peninnah. Don't be like him. Peninnah, she has lots of children actually, but Hannah cannot bear children. She is infertile, she's barren. And now this, in modernity, we might just be like, hey, she lucked out. Doesn't have to have too many rugrats running around. The kids, hanging off the hip. She can actually go and be what she wants to be, get that career, do that thing. Like, you go. Like, it's all right. That is a modern interpretation placed onto an ancient text. That the context in which Hannah is living understands fertility is a curse from God. That God himself is cursing her. And so she cannot have these children. And if you know this story, she is tortured by this, as many women are still to this day tortured by this reality. But not only just by the reality itself, but she was tortured by the sister wife, Peninnah. She constantly, over and over again, berated her, provoked her, the text says, because of her infertility. And so it caused Hannah to be deeply, deeply depressed. She wanted something so bad and did everything that she could and still could not get what she wanted. Have you ever been there? Have you ever had that instance come up in your life where you've wanted something so bad? Maybe you're praying, God, please. And it's like that prayer is not being answered. It's like that thing it just keeps evading you. And you're trying, and you're begging, and you're pleading. This is Hannah's situation. That's where she's at. And it's not only that, that's enough, right? That's in and of itself a lot. But the text goes even further than that. The Bible doesn't even indict her body as being one that just can't have a child. It's not like this just happened genetically or anything. It actually puts all the blame on God. It says that God is the reason that her womb was closed. That this season that Hannah finds herself in is due to the heavy providential hand of the Lord. Perhaps it's not. We are so quick. I'm so quick at times. Perhaps it's not that the devil is doing something against you, that the darkness is hitting you, that the evil one is trying to attack you. Perhaps it's not. Perhaps it's God. What if it's God and his hand on your life causing some difficult season to come, that he is walking with you in? Through the darkest valley, he walks with you, right? We went through that in Psalm 23. But what if it's him? And she is sitting in that. And Hannah, perhaps like sitting in the cultural context of her day, believing that infertility is a curse from God, perhaps sitting in that says that, you know what, if this is from God, if God has caused this, perhaps God is the only one who can fix this. He can change this. And so what does Hannah do? But she goes to the temple of God. She goes to God, and she is literally bowing down before him and letting him have it. Just literally in our Poured Out series, we went through this text. She didn't hold anything back. She's begging God, pleading God, snot and tears, everything. God, please give me a son. God, please just give me my baby. She's pleading. And I feel that. She's pleading for God, just let me have a child. Let me have a son, please. And she's begging and begging. And you'd expect the prayer to stop there, that she would just end it there, just please, please. But she goes even further. She prays a crazy, bold prayer. She says, it's not just that I want you to provide this for me, but I promise to give it back. I'm going to read it to you. It's right here. 1 Samuel chapter 1, verse 11. Here is Hannah's prayer. Lord of armies, she says. And I love that she starts there. She doesn't start with the problem. God, this is happening. Look at my womb, it's closed. I can't have a child. What is wrong with you? She doesn't start there. She says, Lord of armies. She goes to the person. Lord of armies, if you will take notice of your servant's affliction, remember and don't forget me, and give your servant a son. I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and his hair will never be cut. Let me read that with some emphasis on some different words here. Lord of armies, if you will take notice of your servant's affliction, remember and don't forget me. Give your servant a son, and I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life. Do you hear how crazy that is? She has been begging and pleading year after year as she's going to the temple of God. Lord, give me a son, give me a son, give me a son. And she's praying, and she says that again. Give your servant a son, and I will give him. She has just asked God for the very thing that might end her distress. She just asked God for the thing that might give her joy in her body and peace in her home, that her sister wife can get off of her back. Like, this is what she's asking the Lord, and then immediately she's willing to give it back to the Lord. Like, year after year, she's been provoked by this woman. Year after year for not being able to have a child. Like, she has been depressed because of this. She has been anxious because of this. She has been broken because of this. Been sad, but every other adjective you could use because of this. It is describing a deeply unhappy person. But now, all of a sudden, she is able to say, the one thing that I've always wanted, I'll give it back to you, God. And that part right there, I've not liked that part. I haven't. I have not liked it at all. This is my question. Hannah, why? How did you get there? I don't understand. How did you have the audacity to do that? I want to get there. I want to be there, God. I want to be able to ask and then just say, but it's yours. I want to open my hands, but I want to grip it so badly. How did you get there? And I've been sitting in this, and I've just been angry at God and confused. I don't get it. What are you trying to teach me? God, please show me. And I think that this is the secret to surrender, is what God is teaching me and teaching perhaps someone here. The secret to surrender. Hannah this is the point that I wrote down. I'm just going to read it because I can't say it straight. Hannah got to the point when she was no longer worried about what she thought she needed, but she became a person who was satisfied in the God she already had. She got to the point where she wasn't so fixated on the thing that she desperately wanted and desperately needed, but she became aware and content and satisfied in the God who was already there, the God she already had. And I think that's the secret to surrender. And you might ask, how do you know this? How is this true? Well, the next chapter of 1 Samuel chapter 2 is Hannah's prayer. It is her declaration to the Lord. She's crying out to him in gratitude. And this is how she begins. She says, my heart exalts in the Lord. What does exalt mean? What does, like that's not a word we use often. What does exalt mean? It means to have joy in. It means to be happy in. That is what exalting in something means. And so that means her heart was not happy in a child, in her son. Her heart was not happy in that she got what she wanted. Her heart was happy in the Lord, in the one whom she already had. My heart exalts in the Lord, she says. And so she surrendered everything she ever wanted to him. And this is the truth that God has just wrecked me with, and I'm trying to get here, because truthfully, I'm not here. I'm not here right now, and I'm trying to get there, and I ask for your prayers for me to get there. You will give God anything when you believe he's everything. You will give him anything when you believe he's everything. And unfortunately, there's some times in my life where I just have said, this thing would actually satisfy me better, God. I just really need this, because this is what will provide what I need. This is what will sustain me. This will satisfy me. This will make me full. But we begin to hold on to things and grip things tighter than we ever should. And if we believe that God is everything, we can give him absolutely anything, even those things that our hearts deeply, deeply desire. And maybe it's pure, maybe it's a good thing, but we begin to idolize that thing to the point where God isn't our everything. And I'm convicted of that. And I'm trying to get there. The beauty of all of this is that Hannah, this story of Hannah, it's not the only instance that this happens. That there is this really beautiful depiction of surrender. There's a man named Jesus who did not count himself, who did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but he humbled himself because his God, his Father, was everything to him. There was a king named Jesus who took the form of a servant because his God was everything to him. There's a God named Jesus who was born in the likeness of men, humbled himself, creator to become created, because his God, and we were everything to him. There is a creator, the very God named Jesus, who's breathed. There's nothing in existence that did not come into being because outside of his speaking it into existence, he humbled himself and became obedient to death, even death on a cross, because his God was everything to him. You see, Jesus only had one thing to lose, and that was his life. And so often you and I, we white knuckle grip ours. He literally had nothing else to lose except his life. And so there's not any sense in you and me trying to hold on to ours so often. But I do it, and you do it. Surrender is just hard. And I'm sure there is any number of particular things for you here tonight or watching online, wherever you find yourself, that you know you probably should surrender. Maybe it's some addiction that you might have, arrogance that you battle, greed. Maybe it's just isolation and just wanting to be alone and not in community that God has for you. Perhaps it's apathy. Whatever it might be, the primary thing that God's wanting you and me to surrender is our entire life. Everything. To surrender it all to him. There's this text that the Apostle Paul wrote to the Romans in Romans chapter 12, and he says it like this. This is his attempt at saying this is what we should surrender. He says, therefore, brothers and sisters, in view of the mercies of God, and I love that. It's not in view of the power of God. It's not in view of the mean wagging finger that we sometimes think God is. It is his mercy. What mercy did God show us? But in the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, in light of those mercies, he says, I urge you, I beg you to present your bodies. And when he uses that language, bodies, he means your entire holistic being. Your loves, your gifts, your passions, your money, your relationships, your time. He's asking us to surrender it all, present our bodies, everything, as a living sacrifice. Now, Paul is writing this at a day and time when this is like they literally have the sacrificial system still going on. So they know what it means to do a sacrifice. You kill something, you knock it out. And so Paul's saying here, we need to sacrifice ourselves, a living sacrifice. It's like an oxymoron of sorts, but what he's saying is to just literally lay it all down. To lay it all down, submit it all, because this is holy and pleasing to God. This is your true worship. And I just want to give you this Greek word right here for true. It's said like this, logikane, and it's actually where we get the word logic and reason. It's strictly translated as this is your reasonable, this is the logical explanation of what to do with your life as worship. And so what Paul is saying, just very straightforward, is I know it's scary. I know that it's terrifying. I know that I naturally just want to hold on to all the control of my life. I know that. I get that. But the most logical, reasonable thing that you and I could do is actually lay our lives down and surrender to the God who created you in the first place. Because everything you're experiencing is a first. Everything that I'm experiencing in life is a first. It is your first steps. It is your first date, your first prom, your first breakup, your first marriage, your first job, your first class in college. You are having firsts over and over and over again. You are not an expert. And so the logical, reasonable conclusion of your and my life is that we ought to surrender everything to him, because he's the God who knit you together in your mother's womb. He knows every hair on your head, and he deeply loves you. He loves you, and he has good plans for you, and he wants you to follow and live in those if you're willing to surrender it to him. I know it's scary. Trust me, I'm living it right now. I know it's hard to have the idea of ultimate surrender, opening your hands, living open-handedly with God. That's hard. But hear this truth. There is nothing in your hands that God won't replace with more of himself. There's absolutely nothing in your hands that he will not replace with more of himself if you just trust him, if you just surrender. So let it go. Let it go. Trust him. God is better anyway. He is. But hear me. I'm just going to be real with you. It might suck. It might be hard. I'm experiencing that right now. There's been a lot of things in my life I've had to submit and surrender and let go of, and ain't none of them been fun to do. Just, it's not. You might have some things that you need to sacrifice. You might have to confess some things. You might, like myself, have to start relinquishing some of the control you think you need to have over your life. But on the other side of all of that is God. On the other side of every bit of that letting go is a God who puts more in your hand than you ever let go of. And I don't know about you, but I'd rather have him more than anything in this world, because he is better than everything that this world has to offer. It's just true. And I know that to be true, but sometimes it's hard to trust. Sometimes it's hard to surrender. But hear me, there's freedom on the other side of surrender.